Perfect, Zara. Thank you for starting us off. Right, so I think Natalie started the recording. So without further ado, I will get us going. So good morning, everybody. Really brilliant to have so many of you here with us this morning on what in sort of my part of London at least is a bit of respite from the storm and rain over the weekend. My name's Matthew Halfin. I'm the careers consultant for politics and international relations and the School of Geography, and I'm absolutely delighted to be hosting today's panel, which is all about how you can kind of find and secure opportunities within local and national kind of government. I'm delighted to have with me a number of guests who are representing the different kind of pathways that are available. So just in order they're appearing on my screen, I've got Nat, who is with us from the FCDO, the Foreign Commonwealth and Development Office. We've got Zoe, who is from Impact, which is the local government graduate development program. And we've got Addy, who is here, who is representing the Fast Streams, the civil service graduate program. And really just to give you a tiny bit of a heads up about the structure for today. So in a minute, I'm going to get our panel to kind of introduce themselves and maybe talk a little bit briefly how they found themselves into their current roles. Then we're going to have some guided discussion where we're going to get an overview of the different kind of entry routes that they're kind of representing. So both graduate programs and direct entry, and a bit more about those kind of application processes, the kind of things that those kind of employers are looking for. And then we'll have some time at the end for kind of Q&A, but please feel free to put your questions in the chat as we go. And thank you to everyone who is introducing themselves in the chat. Really lovely to have you with us. So without further ado, I will ask my panel just to introduce themselves and very briefly, maybe as our audience is primarily students and maybe recent graduates, your role, what you studied, and how you got into the work that you're doing now. Nat, if you're happy to kick us off.
Sure, absolutely. So hi, everyone. I'm Nat. Thanks, Matthew, for that introduction. Thanks, everyone, for coming. So I studied history and politics, 2017, 2020. Then I took a year out to teach English in Spain. And then I studied for a master's in international social and public policy. Then a year after that, I joined the FCDO, direct entry, so not fast stream. And I've been there just over a year and a few months. And I work mostly on EU stuff.
Perfect. Thanks, Nat. And really great to have that kind of that sense of your kind of journey, and also have someone who's just a few steps kind of further down the road to give their perspectives. Zoe, you're next up. Same for you.
Hi, I'm Zoe. I studied politics and I graduated in 2023. I graduated last year, and my route in was basically I was a massive local politics nerd. I was a politics nerd, and then I realised that councils are, and I say this with fondness to Addy and Nat, way more exciting. So I know, way more exciting. So I started caring about that, and now I'm on Impact because I remember in the summer after my first year of university, I googled local government graduate scheme, and now I'm on it. So yeah, big nerd.
Very cool, Zoe. Well, it sounds like you are the perfect person for that job. So really great to have you with us. And Addy, over to you.
Morning, everybody. First of all, great to have you all here. My name's Addy. I am an HR fast streamer. I studied classics at university, but I finished back in 2016, and I had another career beforehand for 7 years in the hospitality sector.
Perfect. Thank you all. Really great to have you with us. And I think sort of what we were going to start with is just to get a sense of particularly for the two kind of graduate programs that Addy and Zoe are representing. Now, if you'll forgive us starting there, just what an overview of what those programs sort of constitute, and kind of broadly what the application process and timings for those entail, and sort of hopefully most people are aware that the fast stream window has closed for this cycle, but we're expecting to have people on the call who are going through that assessment process at the moment. And then that will come to you to understand if and how the application process differs for kind of direct entry routes. Andy, why don't we start with you?
Yeah, absolutely. So FastStream is a 3 to 4 year graduate program. There are, last time I counted, 17 different variations of the scheme, from everything from human resources, which I do, to engineering and science. There's policy, there's cybersecurity, there's a whole rift of different things depending on what you're interested in. And the way it works is that you do a 1 year placement in each department. And you will do a variety of different roles that are sort of vaguely related to the nature of the specialisation that you've picked. And you will gradually accrue experience. As you go through the scheme, the roles that you do will progressively get more senior. You'll have line management responsibilities and so on. And the aim is that you progress from being roughly a sort of junior manager to being a kind of high-ranking middle manager, with the expectation that within the next few years afterwards you'll progress to senior management. Senior management obviously being working with, right at the heart of government, with ministers. A number of the different schemes have qualifications that are required, and the FastStream will pick up the cost of all of those, whether that be you have to complete a certification to join a learned institute, or you have to complete a postgraduate diploma. All of those costs will be met by the FastStream, and there's a plethora of other opportunities, learning and development opportunities available as the scheme progresses.
Perfect, thanks, Adi. And do you want to go on and just talk about what the application process for the FastStream is?
Yep, absolutely. So the FastStream application process is selection of tests, which hopefully all of you have registered to take part in, or are in the process of doing that in preparation for next year. And they tend to, at the moment, there are 3 tests. It's a case study, a situational judgment test, and a data/numerical test. And they are used quite extensively, so it's extremely important that you prepare extensively in advance of those to take them. So make sure to do the practice tests and to use Graduate First, which is a very useful resource for making sure that you're familiar with those. Then that progresses to a written application for some of the schemes. And they will ask you for motivational questions. They will ask you for what kind of basic experience, what your knowledge level is, and they'll give you some, I guess, some sort of hypothetical scenarios to see how you'd react in those situations. And if you're able to pass that, you will then go to a assessment centre, and again that has all run online. That has 3 different components. There is a communication exercise, a written exercise, and I guess almost like a kind of oratorical kind of presentation type exercise as well. And then on some schemes afterwards, if you pass the application, or the assessment centre, some have a panel interview afterwards, but that is not the case for all schemes. So that is the gist of the application procedure for the FastStream.
Thanks, Eddie. Obviously, lots of information to digest for those of you that are hearing that for the first time. So feel free to put any questions that you've got in the chat as they kind of come to you. Also, maybe have a quick glance at the application process on the FastStream website to kind of fill in any gaps and kind of help you understand that kind of journey. But thank you, Eddie. You're doing an amazing job at covering a lot in a very concise format there. Zoe, over to you.
I was just thinking, Adi, you can tell you work in HR. You just sold that very well.
Thank you.
But yeah, so the Impact Graduate Scheme. So generally, it's a fast track graduate scheme into local government. So you generally do 3 or 4 placements across the council. So I've done 1 so far. I've done 1 in the policy and science communities team, specialising in community engagement. Then there was a fund that I managed, and I did some of our cost of living work. And now I'm working in our regeneration team, working on town centre regeneration. And then there's a big project called the London Cancer Hub, which I won't go into here, but if you Google it, it'll come straight up. And yeah, so there's that, which people in my council have done bits in HR, like Adi, in, what else is there? climate action, regulatory services, which sounds dull, but they were doing food hygiene inspections, which I think sounds really cool. So you can do bits of housing. We've been kind of everywhere. So children's social care, you can kind of go everywhere across the council, and at least at the council that I'm in, if there's somewhere that you want to do a placement and they're not offering it, then you can approach them and say, I would like to work for you. And generally they're receptive to that. So yeah, so you go around all the different placements in the council, and while you're at it, you're doing a leadership and management qualification. So I'm currently doing a level 7 in strategic management and leadership through the Chartered Management Institute, which is completely covered by a combination of the council and the local government association, I think. But either way, I'm not paying. And yeah, that's impact. I hope that Matthew, have I explained that well?
I thought you explained that brilliantly. And what council are you at, Zoe?
I'm currently at the London Borough of Sutton.
Brilliant, brilliant. Okay, great. Thank you so much. And Nat, kind of getting the kind of contrasting view from your awareness of those kind of direct entry routes. And I guess sort of understanding, is there any seasonality to those? How would people find out about those? And does the application process mirror what we've heard about the graduate schemes, or is it quite different?
Yeah, sure. So the difference between direct entry and the graduate schemes is direct entry advertises for certain roles most of the time, not a broad graduate scheme, but a particular job within a civil service department. You apply for that job in particular. In terms of seasonality, we're talking about a huge range of jobs here, so it's hard to say which ones when they come up exactly. The way to find out about them is just go on civil service jobs and keep an eye open. I would say the real difference between the graduate scheme roles and the direct appointment, direct entry roles is that degree of you're choosing a particular job. You've got I would say, slightly more control over the role you're actually going to be working in. And then after that is when you can look around more in civil service, because there are more jobs available internally within the civil service than externally to new applicants. So once you're in, you can start looking around for other roles as well.
Perfect. Thanks, Nat. And in terms of the application process,
Sure.
sort of what was your experience of that? And does that differ significantly across department, or is there some consistent sort of flavour?
No, thanks to the hard work of civil service HR, it's all very, very consistent. Some might say too consistent, but we'll leave that for another day. The point is you apply, you put in normally a CV and a motivational statement sometimes, and you also put in your example of certain behaviours. So you can find these online, but it'll be one example of delivering at pace, for instance. Then for the vast majority of jobs, you'll then be sifted and then go through to an interview. At the interview, you basically do the same thing, behaviours, strengths. Again, examples of these are all available online. Civil service really does lay out very transparently how it works. You get scored, I think, out of 7. Once you hit the bar, once you're the best candidate based on the interview, you then go through to be appointed. Then, depending on the department you're in, you might have to go through security checks. There are a degree of low-level security checks for almost all roles, but the more exposed roles will have more intrusive security checks, and those can take a while to complete, as I found out.
Yeah, thanks, Nat. That's really helpful. And I think one significant difference there is obviously an absence of these kind of online assess as a kind of key filtering kind of mechanism. That may be a relief to some of you, or not to others, depending on your appetite for those, and the lack of virtual assessments into a more traditional process. It sounds like in terms of CV and kind of statements, moving to kind of interview for those direct entry routes. So if you've fallen foul of those kind of online tests, I guess just be reassured there are other routes that don't require you to excel at those to kind of progress. So thank you, Nat. That's really helpful. And Zoe, be great just for you to fill in the gaps in terms of the application process for kind of impact.
Yeah, so it's situational judgment test, classic. Then video interview. So it's one of those where they ask you a question and then you record it and it goes back. Then assessment centre, virtual assessment centre. Then you get to a point where they say you could now do the job. And then you go to, at least for me, I went to Birmingham and all the councils were there, and I met with all the councils and decided. You then get to rank. I think at that point I chose London, and then I got to rank my like top 5 councils that I wanted to interview with, and I interviewed with my top 2, and then which was Enfield and Sutton, and then Sutton hired me. So, and then, well, that's the you then go and interview. So Enfield, I went to Enfield and spent a day with them and did the interview and did like other things to kind of test your. I did the spaghetti marshmallow challenge, which if you haven't done yet, you probably will do in your cycle of hellish interview things. But I did that, and then other interview things, and then at Sutton it was just a straight interview. But it's generally just straight interview and then you're done. But that's the impact application process.
Thanks, Zoe. And it's probably worth noting at this juncture, although we'll say again at the end, but the applications for the local graduate development programme are currently open until early January. Is that right?
People, they're still open, and I highly recommend you put an application in. Please come and join me. It's great over in councils. Highly recommend. I would also say that much like Nat said with the civil service, the impact application programme, it's like all the behaviours that they're looking for are on the website. So if like I've sent the link into the chat and I can do it again, but all the behaviours they're looking for are on the website. So if you think through before each of the application stages, right, these are the behaviours, how have I in previous work shown these behaviours, you'll be flying. And I also highly recommend knowing about local government, not being a massive nerd, I'm a weirdo even by council standards, but like do research and know the kind of basic what's going on, the fact that no one has any money, like you kind of do some basic research and it will help you a lot.
Perfect. Thanks, Zoe. And do you have any awareness of direct entry alternatives into sort of local government?
Yeah, I mean, you can just apply for jobs. No one's stopping you applying for jobs. But I haven't done that, so I don't particularly know. But I don't know what it's like applying for jobs. I also think that it depends on which council. But yeah, like there's no one's stopping people who just have. In fact, someone that I went to university with didn't go onto the graduate scheme and just applied for a job directly. Like councils are more than happy to hire people straight out of uni. So if you want to apply, go for it.
Perfect. Thanks, Zoe. That's really helpful. So I can see a kind of flurry of questions in the chat relating to the application process. And I think I'm tempted, if the panel are happy, to kind of take some of those up front, because I know that will be on quite a few people's minds. So for anyone, and I think this will most be directly relevant to you, Adi, in terms of the fast stream process, for anyone that has already in that process, and most likely from the people I've been seeing, is at that virtual assessment centre kind of stage. Are you able to talk about, you mentioned obviously there's variety between different departments, but my understanding is there's some evolution this year in terms of those 3 core elements. So you mentioned the kind of the written exercise, the case study element, and then I've been working with students on, I think it's the personal development kind of interview. Could you say anything more about what's changed and any guidance you'd have for those who are preparing for any of those 3 elements over the next kind of couple of weeks?
Yeah, certainly. So unfortunately, there's only a limited amount that I can share because obviously we have to keep that process confidential. Otherwise, it wouldn't be a test. The way the written exercise is going to be constructed, I believe, is that it's going to be a sort of options paper. For those of you who haven't come across one of those before, it's worth reading up on them. And again, this might differ on the day, but what an options paper essentially is that you have a problem and your role is to basically summarize that piece, whatever the issue is, to a senior stakeholder, whether that be a senior leader in the civil service or an elected official, to try and understand what that issue is, give them a real snapshot, and then present them with a number of different courses of action to take. And then it's crucial to put what are the advantages of each approach, what are the disadvantages of each approach. That is a job role that is very, very, very common in the civil service, particularly when you get, well, within any grade, but particularly once you finish the scheme, it is a skill that is very heavily utilised. So it's worth having a look on the internet for examples of the options papers. I can possibly dig out a few of my own, which I've written in the past, to give people an idea of what's involved in one. But that is very useful. Unfortunately, the personal development conversation, I'm not too sure about. And the stakeholder communication exercise, from what I've read, will be communicating a difficult issue to a wide audience. And you'll have to talk through it and also talk through what your communication strategy is going to be. So having a basic look at this stage at sort of communication matrices, having a look at how government policy is communicated in newspapers and so on. What do you think is effective? What do you think is not so effective? Would be helpful. But like I said, unfortunately, they have changed the process considerably, and they are being quite tight-lipped about what the exercise is precisely going to consist of. But if you look at those things, those will certainly stand you in good stead going forward.
Thanks, Adi, and definitely don't want to push you on anything that that strays the wrong side of that line. But do you any idea what the motivation for those changes has been over the past year?
I wouldn't be able to say, I'm afraid. That is run centrally by the Cabinet Office, and they are constantly looking at ways to improve the process, to give candidates a better experience, to improve diversity, and so they're constantly looking at ways in which they can improve the process. So it would probably be a very long, complex occupational psychologist who would be best equipped to give you an answer to that question rather than me.
Thank you, very Kelly. Well, that's a webinar in itself. Maybe we can work on that one. I'll come in a moment to a more general question about what kind of qualities and strengths are valued in these roles, and you've pointed all of you to these kind of behaviours and strengths that are kind of documented online. Just specifically, some other questions for those that are thinking about doing either considering the local government scheme or considering the fast stream internship or graduate scheme next year, and are looking how they can best prepare with their tests. You mentioned Graduate First, and Natalie, if you haven't already, if you don't mind, just to get the link to the Queen Mary Graduate First kind of login and bang it in the chat, or we can do that afterwards so people can see that. Any other kind of tips for preparing for those tests? And I guess partly in my mind is the awareness that you really do have to do extremely well in one or more of those tests to kind of meet the cut. And so obviously practicing as much as you can to get confident with the methodology, because I think that is a huge part of it, is one piece of advice. But anything that you've noticed for people that have managed to kind of do well, because obviously it's a certain kind of skill set which may not also be the skill set that is required sort of in the job. Zoe, let you come in first.
I was just going to say that if you've got another year and you're looking at it and thinking, this is so overwhelming, I just can't do it, the number one thing I would say is volunteer. And if you can't afford to volunteer, get a job. And that, like, the transferable skills that come from either volunteering or getting a job will be so helpful. So highly recommend doing that. Like, not that I would know, but I highly credit the fact that I've got 6 years of experience in local politics to the fact that I got this job. And like, it's the same with other people who've worked. Like, if you're looking at these assessment centres, if you're looking at these application processes and thinking that's just so overwhelming, go and get experience. It will help you no end. Like, highly recommend.
Yeah, thanks, Zoe. That's great. Yeah, Adi, anything you want to add to that in terms of preparing for these online tests?
I think one is to definitely review the civil service success profiles. That's something that I've added in the chat, and I can add that, send that out again. Because sometimes what the civil service considered to be delivering at pace or leadership or teamwork and so on has a very precise meaning. And what you should think about when you approach the tests, particularly the situational judgment tests and so on, is have a think. If I were a civil servant, what would I do in that situation? What is the civil service looking for in that scenario, rather than necessarily what you think? Dare I say, sometimes maybe what the common sense reaction to a question would be wouldn't necessarily be what the test is looking for. So it's always worth considering those success profiles. The other thing, I know it sounds really basic, but just don't do them all at the last minute in one go. Take the time to do them separately. Many of them are untimed, so obviously do them in one go, one sitting if you can, but take as much time as you need. If you have any kind of health condition or need any kind of reasonable adjustments, don't be shy, please speak up. The tests can be modified to accommodate those sorts of issues. I would just say, just treat it as if you were taking an examination. So, just make sure you're in a quiet place. You're not going to be disturbed. Do the tests with, a couple of days break between them. Make sure you're really well prepared beforehand. Take them slowly and get any kind of adjustments that you need. And just keep in mind the success profiles when you're answering them, and really sort of research those and reflect on those.
Perfect. Thanks, Eddie. That's super kind of helpful. And that actually very naturally brings me on to my next question. Maybe Nat, if I start with you. Obviously, those of you in the civil service have mentioned these kind of profiles, but more broadly, two parts of the question actually. So one, I think, quite specific. So especially for direct entry roles, do you need to have had sort of work experience or any particular type of experience kind of already? And what kind of qualities, attributes have you observed kind of make for a kind of strong candidate?
Yeah, look, I think there's two parts to that question. The first part is what experience and traits help you get in, and what experience and traits actually help you do a good job once you're in. So one good thing about the civil service recruitment process is that it is incredibly transparent and formulaic for every role. The behaviours are very clearly listed. If you hit the points in the behaviours in your application, you will score highly most of the time. So make sure you read them, make sure you know what they are, and when you craft your responses, make sure they hit those points. In terms of the CV, prior work experience is always good, but it's not an obligation. In terms of what things help you when you're actually in, I think the most important thing in civil service is a willingness to learn, and a willingness to learn on the job, but also take advantage of all the learning opportunities out there. The great thing about civil service career, and especially the FCDO, is the variety. If you want to, you can do a huge amount of roles with the FCDO in different places, working on different range of topics. So although right now it's all about how to get into the civil service, I think once you're in, if you're in, it's all about really trying to learn, really trying to take advantage of the opportunities, and being very flexible. But in terms of just getting in, like I said, just go back to success profiles, read them, know them by heart, and then just basically regurgitate them for your interviews.
Thanks, Nat. A certain picture is emerging around that, so that's really kind of helpful. And just to probe you a little bit more on the experience, so thinking of kind of peers that you've encountered, and I'll bring the question more broadly in a second. But thinking of peers that you've encountered, sort of, is there any kind of commonalities in terms of, do people tend to have had some experience in any particular type of experiences coming into the role, or are most people straight from kind of education? What's kind of been your kind of perception? And again, are you aware whether that differs significantly between departments?
No, I think it's incredibly varied. I think it'd be really hard to give one size fits all answer on that. I mean, just thinking about myself, I applied for the FCDO after having done 1 year working in Spain and quite a few jobs throughout my time in undergrad and during my masters. They definitely helped. I don't know if they were decisive. Probably what was decisive was, just to beat this drum a bit more, was the success profiles. The point of the CV, the motivational statement, is to get you to the interview stage. And in the interview stage is when you talk about your success profiles and your behaviours. But yeah, in terms of my colleagues and who I work with, there's a huge range of backgrounds. I know some people who joined straight through the graduate scheme, through the internship schemes, pretty much straight out of education. And there are some people who are coming to it as a second career. So one of my colleagues, I think, spent 7 years with Royal Mail, and then he joined the FCDO after that.
Yeah, thanks, Nat. That's super helpful. And thank you both, all three, for putting answers in the chat as they come up. Zoe, did you want to come in on that?
No, I'm just listening to Nat talk about the success profiles and how everyone has to know about them. I think that's really positive advice. So no, I don't think so.
Okay, perfect. And sort of, I think I saw a question around, well, so let me take that one actually, as I noticed it. So obviously, two of the three of you did a politics related kind of degree and kind of further qualification. As I think, Adi, just to kind of amplify, I think what you said in the chat, that isn't a requirement for working in a government role, and that's kind of shaking his head in agreement as well. Do you want to just kind of sort of knock that one on the head?
Definitely not. You do not have to study politics. Honestly, if you didn't, like, there's skills to be learned everywhere. I think I put this in the chat. There's someone who did the grad scheme at Sutton whose degree was in English literature and Russian. He speaks Russian. It's of absolutely zero use, but so is his degree. Now works in children's social care. But you definitely you do not have to have done a politics degree in order to do impact. Definitely not.
Perfect. And in your experience, Zoe, around the kind of experiences you mentioned, the value of doing volunteering, especially anything that it gets you involved in local community, local politics. Any other kind of things you've kind of noticed in terms of, well, whether work experience is valued and required as part of the application sort of criteria, and any kind of themes from people you've encountered on the programme?
I mean, the local politics thing, definitely don't view that as like normal. I think, as far as I'm aware, I'm the only person I've met on the grad scheme who's done that. I was just weird. But I'm also just the person sat in front of you, so you can ignore that if you want. But yeah, so people I've met on the grad, I think everyone's just got their own experience. You can do volunteering in any form. It's not really about the volunteering itself, it's about the transferable skills. So when you volunteer in a group, you develop teamwork, you develop resilience. If you're working towards a broader goal, there's so many transferable skills that you develop that are so useful in a role like mine. That yeah, so I would say everyone has something that they've done that wasn't just their degree, but that comes in so many different forms. It would be kind of hard to comment on what specifically. Find something that interests you and go and do that, and you can find anything. I think we've got someone in the grad scheme at Sutton who started this year who's really big into housing and has done loads of work around housing policy and homeless people and affordable housing. Just find something that works for you and go and do that and talk about that in your application, and you should be okay.
Perfect. Thanks, Zoe. And Dee, thank you for your patience. I think you had your hand up to add something in.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I guess two very brief things. One is that Nat mentioned the personal statement. Even in some ways, the personal statement should resemble the success profiles, and they should make mention of them. So the success profiles really are crucial throughout the whole process. One just point to add is that in the, I guess, giving the fast stream perspective, the fast stream is very much focused on gauging potential. So experience is not really something we look out for. It's your ability to complete those tests to a high standard, and also to the situations that you are given are kind of naturally higher level than those that you'll encounter it initially when you start the job, and it's to see how you would react in those situations. So we, in the fast stream, we are not at all looking for experience. Being someone who works in normal civil service recruitment and has interviewed an awful lot of people, for direct entry, the roles tend to, when you give your examples in an interview, when the interviewer says, tell me about a time you demonstrated leadership or worked at pace or so on, those usually tend to land better if they've come from, if you're giving a professional example, because it means that the interviewers can easily imagine you doing that job. Now, that's not at all to say that you need to have a job that is very similar to the role that you're going to be doing, and particularly if you've been a student, you've been in education, you're not going to have had the opportunity to do that. But if you can frame your examples, write them up beforehand, and almost learn them off by heart, if you can frame them to really hit those success profiles. So say, for example, they ask you how you've delivered at pace, but you've worked in a restaurant or you've worked in retail at Christmas or something like that. Talk about that and trying to really sort of incorporate that into the success profiles method. Don't be afraid to sort of adapt your example to fit the criteria and to bring some sort of transferable skill. If you do an internship that's sort of very high level and fantastic, but I know that not everyone has access to those opportunities. So don't be afraid if you've sort of just had to graft in your summer holidays. Don't be afraid to look at ways in which those can be transferred over. Just make sure you hit the success profiles is the main thing.
Yeah, thanks, Eddie. And then just to kind of double down on that, as that's obviously such a critical part for the central government roles. Like, any tips that yourself and Nat would have in terms of actually, because I think some students can find it quite hard to do that translation work, especially if there's kind of success profiles that are written in terms of civil service kind of language. Anything more you could say about maybe to kind of how you might kind of translate some of those commonplace examples, things that people do well, or kind of common pitfalls people fall into, where they fall short on that?
Yeah, sure, absolutely. So I'm just going to post something very quickly in this chat called the STAR method. And this is the way you should really structure your answers. So you outline what the situation is, what the task is, and then where you really want to focus on is the action and the results. And obviously, what a lot of people do is that they give a narrative and they give this long kind of winded narrative about what's happening in the organization. And that's great, but that's not what we're interested in. What we want to know is, what did you do and what is the result? And if you can, try and give the result as something numerical. So say, for example, you worked in retail, or you were working as a waiter in a restaurant, and you could talk about, because of your fine service or the way you kind of restructured the team that you were working with, you boosted sales, or you mitigated an issue that was causing a loss to the business. Try and get a kind of numerical result in there, because that, again, it helps the interviewers not have to think, basically. So they think this person has improved the system, 10%, 20%, whatever. So that looks really good. Give as much detail in the action as you can. Don't bother too much with the situation and the task. And then always use I when you are writing those statements. Never use we, never use the team. Just focus on yourself. Even in the real life example, if it were a team effort, talk about what you did, whether that be as leader or whether that be as follower. Really kind of hone in on what you did, and frankly take all credit for what the particular result was, because obviously that will help you to look more effective in the interview process.
Yeah, thanks, Adi. Yeah, and then Zoe, just any tips on how to kind of do that kind of mental kind of lifting of kind of translating experiences you might have had, campus roles, volunteering, part-time jobs, into kind of good examples for any interviews that you have. Nat.
Firstly,
Oh, Zoe, you go first.
Sorry, I was just going to say, Addy is bang on with the STAR method thing. They can tell you work in HR, you're very good at this. Like everything that Addy just said, I agree with. And then, when it comes to adapting it, I just tend to think about, I remember I used to give tours of Newcastle Uni, and I would have families coming to me often quite stressed and needing a lot of, needing help. And I would think about the transferable skills you need in those moments. Thinking quickly on your feet, leadership. You're you're on your own. You've got to kind of direct people. You're working as part of a broader team running an open day. You just think about that, and then think about those moments and the transferable skills you need there, and then sell that in the interview. Because I don't know about anyone else, I had the problem of thinking, it doesn't really count. Like, this isn't what they're looking for. This isn't that big a deal. It's just working an open day. But it turns out that is actually what they're looking for. Like, they're not looking for you to tell them that you can do the job. You haven't done the job. That's not no. But if you're saying no, all the necessary skills in order to do this job I already have, then that, you know, you're always like, that's what they're looking for. So yeah, I always try and think all the like volunteering experiences and all the tough moments, anything that was hard that you've done, think about the skills that got you through it. That's my kind of overarching theme.
Yeah, I really like that, Zoe. Yeah, I think that's a really great kind of flag, isn't it? Like anything that you found hard, there's going to be some learning in it. So take the time to think about how did I do that? You know, how did I kind of navigate that, and what did I learn from the process? Thank you both of you. That's super helpful. Nat, anything you wanted to add to build on that?
Yeah, I just say don't overthink it. In the same way that when you're revising for an A level or a test or even a GCSE, the best way to do well is to go and read the mark scheme and work out what they want you to do. Read the success profiles, work out what they want you to say, and then work out how you say that. Don't make the interviewer read between the lines. Literally say if the success profile says, make sure, you know, you say an example of a time you handled conflict in the team. Say, as part of this team, I handled conflict by literally signpost them. Imagine they're like an AI program that's scanning your answer to hit certain buzzwords and then use those buzzwords.
Yeah, thanks, Nat. And maybe just to kind of make that even more explicit, and Andy, from your experience, like in terms of that mark sheet, is it really a kind of score out of, I think you said 7 for how well did this individual evidence that kind of success profile? And is there anything more about kind of, you know, what gets you to a 7 versus a 4 or a 5?
So I think, to be honest, the scores of 6 and 7 are very difficult to achieve. You want to be aiming for a 4 and a 5. It's very important to make sure that your application is consistent, because when we select candidates, we go for the person, it sounds obvious, but the person with the highest score. So make sure you might have a cracking example for one, but then your others are weaker. Try and balance the examples so that they're equally strong throughout. And when we get to sort of tie break situations, which do happen from time to time, where people have the same score, we would go for the person who has a higher sort of average score in each behavior, rather than necessarily if they've got, you know, a couple of 7s and a couple of 3s, let's say, we would go for the person who's got the sort of the average of 5, let's say. Sorry, not the average of 5, but they've got a 5 on every score. So that's worth kind of keeping in mind when trying to do a direct entry application.
Yeah, thanks, Nat. Anything you want to add to
that? No, I mean, just to harp on this point that I seem to be returning to again and again, there's a good phrase in public sector management, which is any measure eventually becomes a target. And I think that's definitely happened with the behaviours. The behaviours were designed to measure an applicant's experience. I think now, if you're trying to get in civil service, the best thing to think of them is a target to hit rather than necessarily measure, and really, really work to them.
Perfect. Thank you. Okay, that couldn't be any clearer. So Nat, I know you said there were some questions you'd received in advance from students. Any that we haven't covered, or anything you've picked up in the chat that we haven't spotted yet?
Let me just have a read through. So some of them are definitely things that have already been covered. So there is one for Addy. What does a typical day look like on the civil service fast stream?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Unfortunately, it's not a very good answer, I'm afraid. It just simply depends on what job you're doing, and that differs depending on the department, depending on how busy you are. I mean, I can talk you through sort of what I do on a day-to-day basis. So I'd probably spend 1 or 2 days a week kind of interviewing or recruiting people, and then the rest of the week I would work on longer-term projects to try and troubleshoot the recruitment process, to try and improve it. And I don't have any kind of particular start or end time. I'm able to sort of work flexibly and decide those things myself. I usually have, say, maybe around 8 to 10 hours of meetings every day. Sorry, every day. I wouldn't get any work done if I had them every day. 8 to 10 hours of meetings a week. that's pretty much mine, but my experience is very different. And I guess that's a joy of the fast stream, is that your experience in some cases would be completely different from that. You would have even more freedom, or possibly even every half an hour of your day would be sort of dealing with sort of ad hoc tasks. So it's very, very different. One advantage that you would have is that you would be able to experience all those different types of working. They try and give you very different jobs throughout the fast stream in order to have a wide experience, and also to give you an opportunity to work in different sorts of organisations and different styles of working as well.
Thanks, Addy. So just work through some of the other questions. There's a lot of questions about preparing for things like the situational tests, admissions tests, case study tests. I know obviously we've already spoken about some of the resources. Is there anything that anyone hasn't mentioned already that might be a good tip for how people can prepare for the different tests? If not, that's totally fine as well. No, so I think it's just going to be a case of researching and using the resources like the links that have been put in the chat. Things like that are super useful, and also keeping an eye out for different mock tests and also mock assessment centres as well, just to give you a bit of an overview on those. One of the questions we've had a number of times is, can international students apply for the roles within your organisations?
Would it be helpful if I spoke first, and then Addy can fact check me when I inevitably get some things wrong? So I think, first of all, it's worth saying all of this information is publicly available. You can just Google it, and it will tell you pretty comprehensively what the rules are. In terms of broad rules, most UK civil service jobs are open only to UK nationals, with additional cohorts added on. So there are certain Commonwealth nationalities that also enable work in certain departments. In terms of exceptions to that, there are also a certain cohort called EUSS holders. So if you were in the UK on an EU nationality prior to Brexit, you have this status, and you can also work in most of these roles as well. There are, in addition to that, certain reserve roles. So obviously, if you are not a UK national, you probably can't work in some roles that are really important for UK national security. Yeah, I think that's the broad strokes of it. But honestly, look at the role spec when it's uploaded. It will say what the eligibility requirements are.
I would agree with everything Nat has said. There are a few jobs that you can get visa sponsorship from. I have to confess they are few and far between, though. It would just be a case of checking on an ad hoc basis at the roles that you're interested in. The rules for the fast stream are, as Nat says, predominantly aimed at UK nationals or EU citizens prior to Brexit. Sorry, EU. Sorry, what's the correct terminology? It's permanent
EU
residence.
settled status.
That's
EU
the one.
settled status holders.
That's the one. You can tell he works in the FCDO. So yes, I would just look at, on an ad hoc basis, at the roles that you're interested in. Direct entry positions. They do very occasionally have visa sponsorship available, but I have to confess it is few and far between.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah, please go ahead.
Basically, I looked at the applications, and in the requirement, I found out that I think some of them that, for example, there's a different borough, but if I live in a different borough and I'm applying like